Hello everyone, it's Duncan Byron here, and I'm so excited about tonight's training. I'm looking at the attendee list, and it is growing very quickly. So I'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to just to get on. But I'll have a quick introduction for our speaker tonight. We've got an extremely special guest, property investor, mentor, and one of the country's top LHA experts. It's Mr. Mike Frisby, and Mike has been developing a thriving property business over the last 5 years, quietly building up a high-income producing property portfolio worth in excess of £8 million. He is an authority in buying good quality rental properties in the southeast of England and is hugely experienced at maximising the cash flow from his own and other investors' property, focusing in particular on the social housing sector. So it is my absolute pleasure to be able to introduce Mike onto this webinar. Thanks so much for being here, Mike.
That's my pleasure. That's my pleasure.
So I know that you sent me over the slides earlier, and I had a quick look over, and I know that we got a lot of content to go through. So do you want to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I know that Duncan wanted me to talk particularly about one of my properties, where I make 22,440 profit PA from one property alone. So that will be one of the topics that we'll be going through tonight. But what I wanted to do is start off a little bit about myself, so you can all understand where I've come from, introduce myself, tell you a bit about myself, then going into the whole local housing allowance market and social housing sector on how you can really increase your rents and how I do that. And then if you don't have any properties, you might be thinking, how is this relevant to me? Well, then I go into the whole of the lease to let. People might know it as rent to rents, but I go into the whole of the lease to let arena that I've been doing for about 5 years now. So I've been operating that model for quite some time before it suddenly became big in the property world over the last year or so. So just a little bit about myself. I started off in the corporate world, where I worked in brands, marketing and strategy, and I was lucky enough to work for some fantastic brands, Guinness being one of them. So you could have often found me in the pub connecting with the consumer, drinking some Guinness, so that was quite a good job to have at the time. And then I went on to work for Unilever. Unilever do lots of brands. You might not have heard of them, the company itself, but you would have heard its brands like Persil, Lynx, Dove, Flora, Magnums, Knorr, food. So it just goes on and on and on in the food sector and the personal health sector, and so a lot of the supermarket brands are part of Unilever. So it's a massive worldwide organization. But while I was there, there's only one constant in life, I say, and that's change. Unilever kept changing, and you had to reapply for your jobs, and I just thought, this isn't the world for me. Also, it was a very large, cumbersome and slow organization, and I just got fed up that I just wanted to be more entrepreneurial, much more sort of in control of my own destiny than working out who to suck up to next as to which job I should get next. So while I was there, I started researching in property, started investing in property, and then I thought to myself, well, I know a little bit about property now, but if I gave myself full amount of time to buy property, then I reckon I can make a lot of money in it if I spent full time on it. So through the change program, there was an opportunity to take redundancy, and I thought, what's the worst that can happen? I just have to go back to work. So that was my reason why for a while, is that I just didn't want to go back into the corporate world. I thought, this is my opportunity to escape. Otherwise, I've got a lifetime working in big organizations, and they seem to control you, and it wasn't something that I wanted. So I jumped out, and I was so determined not to go back that I basically bought over 20 properties in that first year that I jumped out, and that meant I didn't have to go back to Unilever, and I could continue my property business. So it was all going along well, and what I was doing is I was buying properties, refinancing relatively quickly, and pulling money out that way, and really focusing on capital growth. Because at the time, that's what I knew. That was the model that everyone talked about, how properties went up every 7 years. Well, if property did go up every 7 years, then I started more than 7 years ago. My properties should have doubled by now, and I can tell you they certainly haven't. We've seen some growth in the last year, but certainly the previous years to that, very little growth at all. So I was happily going along, buying properties. It was all going very well, and by the time I'd amassed a large portfolio, but then obviously the credit crunch came along. The whole Northern Rock episode happened, the credit crunch, and all of a sudden the model and the strategy that I was using was no longer valid. And I'd just been merrily going along and not thinking about things too much and thinking, oh, isn't it great to be out of the corporate world? But this just suddenly gave me a shock, and it was like, I've got to rethink this. I've really got to identify how I can make money, and I realized I had a massive portfolio. So I thought what I need to do is I need to look at that portfolio and really wring as much money out of that as I could look at, really increasing my profit, quadruple the profit. I hadn't been managing my portfolio that well because I was so focused on continuing to buy rather than actually what I now had, and I had a whole load of assets that wasn't producing me that much money at the time. So I put my strategy hat back on that I acquired, in the corporate world, and thought, well, let's apply this to my current business. So obviously the first thing people think about when they want to increase profits out of property is, that's right, HMOs. Everyone thinks of HMOs. Now, if you go around networking events or meet people in HMOs, I always find, you say, what do you do in property? And an HMO investor says, yeah, I invest in HMOs. And the next thing, so for profit, so you should be churning out a lot of profit. And the next thing they say is, have you got any money? Because they're interested in borrowing money because they always need. So HMOs need a lot of money into the properties. Now, they are good investments, but it does mean you need a lot of capital. Now, I had a lot of properties by then, and I was thinking, well, gosh, if I had to invest a lot of capital to every property, I wouldn't be making any money for years. And really, it was all about making money instantly, not in the future, now, without investing huge amounts. So that's when I started to look at the marketplace. And I looked at the marketplace, and I discovered that social housing market was a huge market. The government spend about 23 billion a year currently on social housing. And I thought to myself, I only need a little bit of that to make a bit of money. And so you can see how it's just grown over time, and it's the red line that is currently tracking on. Now, a lot of people say to me, aren't you scared about the reforms? Aren't you scared how they're cutting housing benefit? Well, if they didn't do the reforms, you could see that the market would have just continued to grow almost without any control. And so the reforms have come in, but it hasn't cut the market. It's just sort of held it steady. So it's still 22, 23 billion, and still a massive market. So I'm not too bothered about all of this. Everyone says, oh, we have to make all of these cuts. Well, of course, there are some sensible cuts that have been introduced by the government, which I'm for, but actually it's still a massive market. Also, what has happened over time is that private landlords have become more important in the sector, because social housing also includes local councils, it includes housing associations, and then it includes landlords like ourselves who rent to tenants on LHA. And when I first started back in 2008, the private sector basically accounted for a quarter of the whole social housing sector, and now private landlords account for a third of the social housing sector. So the private landlord sector is starting to become the biggest sector out of all the different sectors amongst everywhere, really. So the private rental sector is now enormous. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain the whole local housing allowance system, what it often is referred to, the housing benefit system. I know some people here will probably know quite a bit. Some will probably be aware of some of my advanced strategies, and some probably have no idea at all. So I'm going to start from the beginning, if that's okay, work my way through, and then go into some of my advanced strategies. And if you don't get the basics, you're going to find it difficult to get the advanced strategies, and that's why I have to start off with the basics. And a lot of people can learn something along the way. So what happens is the whole country under the social housing sector and the LHA is split up into what's known as broad market rental areas. There's about over 150 in the country, and then they set the rents. They take an average of all the rents. So they look at the private sector rents and they go, okay, what are all the average rents in there, and then they set the local housing allowance rates. They don't take the halfway point, they kind of take the third of the way up point, so the 30th percentile. So it is down the cheaper end, and that's why a lot of people say, well, you can't make money out of social housing because you get less rent. Well, there's lots of ways to actually improve your rentals through the social housing sector. You just need to understand it and understand it why. Now, I didn't say, I think, at the beginning that a lot of my investing, I live in Surrey, but I do invest in Guildford and Portsmouth, and my main broad market rental area is Portsmouth. I've dealt with lots of councils all over the country. They all have their own nuances, but essentially the whole local housing allowance system is the same everywhere. It applies in every region. So here is the broad market rental area for Portsmouth. If you look at the top area, the top part of that broad market rental area, there's a place called Petersfield. Petersfield is quite a wealthy place, so therefore the property prices are high, the rents are high, and if you're an LHA tenant, you're always going to struggle to rent out there because the LHA rates will be a lot lower. But what it does is it helps bring up the average in the whole area. So I do a lot of investing in Portsmouth itself, which is that blob at the bottom, you know, rents and LHA rates aren't too different. But to the left, as you're looking at, to the west of there is a place called Gosport. Gosport is the cheaper area of the whole of the broad market rental area in terms of property prices, but also in terms of rents. Now, most of their rents are actually below, a lot of their rents are actually below the local housing allowance rate, the market rents. So there is an opportunity that if you charge local housing allowance rates for your rents in that area, is you could boost your returns. And also because the property prices are cheap, if you rent out at a full LHA rate, your yields in that area are going to be fairly attractive. And with the fact that there are averages, this is kind of the law of average, every broad market rental area will have an area, even if it's just a few streets, that are cheaper than other areas that make it really attractive to let to local housing allowance tenants, just by charging the local housing allowance rate rather than the market rent. And what you've got to remember is housing benefit is paid at the lowest of the local housing allowance rate or the actual rent charged. So if you're in Gosport charging the market rent and an LHA tenant comes along, he will only get what you have on the AST, so the actual rent. So he will only ever be able to claim for the actual rent. So for example, if he was in a one-bedroom flat in that area, the LHA rate's £500. Now if the market rent there is 475 and you charge 475, that's the maximum you can ever claim. So what you want to do is set your rent at £500, and then the tenant will be able to claim £500 and pay you that. So you should remember to always set your rent at least at the local housing allowance rate. And I come across many landlords who don't know their LHA rates in their area and don't know that they're missing out on rent by not setting it. And even local housing allowance have a local housing allowance tenants, but on lower rents than the actual rates themselves. And I'll show you an example of this of mine, and sometimes it's because they're quirky properties or market nuances that dictate that the market rent for this particular property is smaller, is less. So this is an example for me. I own a block of flats just outside Guildford, on 3 of them I let to professionals and I get £725 a month. That happens to be the LHA rate for a one-bedroom flat in Guildford. You know, it is in the south, it's an expensive area, and that's why it's so high. However, this flat, the 4th flat in there, is a lot smaller. You can see it's 24 square meters. It's quite a small flat. So what I used to have to do was let out the property often to single people because couples found it too small and they couldn't afford the 725. So I'd have to lower the rate to attract them in, and then they're let out. So I'd often have to lower it to 625. But the local housing allowance rate in that area is 725. So what I do now is I put a LHA tenant in there at the rate at 725, and of course I receive 725 a month out of that. And so I've increased my rent from just a one-bedroom flat by £100 just by understanding the rules and regulations around the local housing allowance market. Before I understood, I actually once, because I couldn't find a professional tenant, let to an LHA tenant and only charged them 625. Whereas now I always charge 725 to an LHA tenant, And he's really happy because they struggle in a lot of places to get flats. So he's really happy that he's in there. He's got a lovely flat to himself, and I'm happy because I'm now getting better rents. And there are many reasons why I attract people in and do that. The next key principle that you've got to understand is that it's not about the property itself. So you often hear these, oh, well, it's the 3-bedroom rate, the 2-bedroom rate. Well, if a family is claiming, for example, and they qualify for the 3-bedroom rate, it's about the family unit, it's about the household unit, it's not about the property. So if they lived in a 3-bedroom property, obviously they'd get the 3-bedroom rate. But if they lived in a 2-bedroom property, they'd still get the 3-bedroom rate. Because it's about them and the children and how they qualify. And it's about them, and then they can choose where they live. And a lot of people say to me, well, why would someone want to choose and live in a 2-bedroom property? Maybe it's a nice 2-bedroom property. Maybe it's in a certain area that their kids want to get, that they want to get their kids into a particular school. Maybe their mother lives on that street, so they prefer to live in a smaller property than a larger property. So there are many reasons beyond number of bedrooms that people are happy to live in properties for, especially LHA tenants. So you have to think about outside the box and stop thinking of your property in a way that a letting agent would, and start to really open your eyes and understand that what I do is, and I'll come onto this a bit later, is I attract the tenants and then slot them into properties that they're appropriate for. Now, an example of where I've done this, again, is in Guildford, again, you know, an affluent area where a lot of people would say, well, you can't, you know, it's not really an LHA area, it wouldn't work. You know, Guildford rents are quite high. They're the highest in the whole broad market rental area in that area. So, but I still make more money letting to LHA tenants than I would to private tenants. So the LHA 3-bed rate is 1148. So that's what I would get for that property. It's a 3-bed property if I was just letting to a family that qualified for a 3-bedroom rate. But I used to have students in this property at 1350, and that's roughly the market. The market rent's a bit below that for a 3-bed, but I used to have students. But I no longer have students in there because I've discovered it's more profitable to rent out at the 4-bedroom rate to a family that qualify for a 4-bedroom house for 1,600. So it's really increased my rent. So I've got another £250 a month just by putting a different type of tenant into my property and not doing anything different. And I'm sure they're going to stay there a long time because they were looking for a property that was bigger than theirs for over 2 years and they couldn't find one. And then they discovered me and I said, oh, I've got this property, you know, it's a 3-bed, 2-reception room house, so they use one of the reception rooms downstairs as a bedroom, and they're more than happy and they're really looking after the property and have been there now a little while. So just to cover off the basic principles, again, it's the individuals or the household unit that counts, not the property. But also, more than one claimant can live in a property, so joint tenants can actually claim separately, and rates are based on the bedrooms required, not on, obviously, the property itself. Housing benefit is paid at the lowest of the local housing allowance rate or the actual rent, and means tested is a means tested benefit. And a lot of my tenants are on what I know as the passport benefits, a job seekers allowance, disability living allowance, so all the basic sort of benefits, and therefore qualify wholly for local housing allowance when they apply for housing benefit. So what I'm going to do now is then share with you some of my more advanced strategies, and later on I'll talk to you about that particular property again in Guildford, but I do a lot of stuff in Portsmouth as well. So I'm going to start off with some examples in Portsmouth, and I'm going to share with you the Portsmouth rate. So if you live in a single room, you'll qualify for the 288 a month. A 1-bedroom flat rate is £500. A 2-bedroom flat rate is, or 2-bedroom rate is 600. 3-bedroom rate is 725, and a 4-bedroom rate is £1,000 in Portsmouth. So let's look at my first example. The market rent is about 725 for this property. I have 2 people in this property. It's just a typical bog standard property, and I get £1,000 a month for this property. A lot of people have heard me talk before. They would know it as the 2+2. What I do is I give 2 over 35-year-olds 2 exclusive rooms in the property because there's 3 bedrooms. There's a self-contained reception room downstairs, They share the kitchen and bathroom facilities, and we get £1,000 a month out of that for that property. So that's not a bad increase. It's £275 a month increase. The great thing about that increase is that it drops straight to the bottom line, and it's profit that you can put in your pocket. And that's the difference between when, you know, a lot of people say, well, I've uplifted the rent through an HMO from 700 to 1500, but you might have £400 worth of bills out of that. So actually your profit isn't a straight increase. So this is another one. Now, a lot of people now know me for the 2+2, but there are many ways under the LHA system that you can increase rents. Lots of different scenarios. And so I'm going to go through some other scenarios which is not about 2+2. So this one here is a market rent of 625. It's a 2-bed, 2-reception room house. Now I used to, I was one of the first properties I bought. Dealt directly with the vendors because I used to leaflet the area and bought the property. And then I gave it to an agent to manage because I was still working at Unilever at the time. And they used to get tenants in for me. It used to take them a little bit of time. It's not the best of properties or the best of conditions. Sometimes they get a couple in, sometimes they get a family in, sometimes once they got 3 sharers in. But whatever the case was, I pretty much got 625 rent for it. Then I paid agency fees, and then therefore my net rent was 552. So that's what I received into my bank account every month. So then obviously I have a mortgage to pay. Now today obviously the interest rates are low, so my mortgage rates went down. So I'm now paying 222 for a mortgage at the moment. Now when I first bought this, I was paying closer to £400, and you can see how if that trickles down the system, I was hardly making any money out of this property, because I also allocate £100 a month to cover, you know, gas safety certs, any maintenance that goes on, because property is far more expensive than everyone thinks to run when they first get into it. But those experienced landlords will know and say, yeah, it is quite expensive. So I have total costs currently on that property of £322. So that means in today's money I'll be making 230, which is actually good money for a single let property, especially a 2-bedroom let property in the south of England. But remember, I was initially paying about 400 quid mortgage, so I was getting about 50 quid a month clear after all my costs for that property. Now imagine if I'd got a void, then it would wipe out my month in my 50 quid a month profit very easily, very quickly. So you know, I wasn't making a lot of money out of that property, and the reason I bought it was for capital growth. I mean, it did go up in value from when I first bought it, so it's not been all wasted. But that was the story. I had a lot of properties like this. I wasn't focusing on cash flow. I was focusing on capital growth. But you need to have cash flow. Yes, again, capital growth is starting to come back, but it's kind of, you should look at it as a bonus. And yes, in the future, we'll all do very well as property investors, and that's why we're in the game, in the long-term game. It's capital growth, but you need to survive the short term and make sure you've got lots of income coming in and out of your properties so you can survive for that period of time. So now that I know what I know about the local housing allowance market, I now get a rent of 1,090 out of that property. I manage it myself, or my team now manages it, because I have a team, because I have that many properties who manage my properties. So basically every month into my bank account I get 1,090 for that property. My mortgage is exactly the same. There's only 3 people in there like it would have been previously, so the costs are totally the same, and therefore I now make £768 profit every month out of a 2-bed house, and I think in the south of England that's amazing. In fact, out of a 2-bedroom house, I think that is a very, very good profit to have. And now that I've sort of started to look at this, it's really interesting when I compare the two, because I'm making more in profit. That's the stuff I can go out and spend than I was in gross rent, 625 under the old system. So I'm making that much more rent, that I'm making that much more profit than I was, even if it was mortgage free and there were no costs under the old system. So obviously that's fantastic, and then I continue to develop, and I've continued to learn, I've continued to make mistakes, and obviously learn from them, and as I do that I go through, and each time I take on a property I make more money. So this is the property that was headlined in the emails. and this was a property that no one else really wanted in Guildford, but I bought it. I was going to let it to students. The market rent, it's a 3-bedder as well, market rent of 1,300. A student let is what I was originally thinking I would do at 1,500. Then I realised and understood the LHA system, understood that even just with 4 people in there, so this is an element of HMO, but it's not really an HMO, because it's got 4 people in there, but I get an LHA rent of 2,860 for that one. I'm not paying masses of bills, I'm not paying any council tax and all of that lot. So therefore, a lot of the stuff just drops down again onto my bottom line and onto my profit. So my monthly profit is 1,870, which translates into over 22,000 a year, which is not bad from one property. And this stuff works everywhere. And I'm now working, and some of my past students on some of my courses are also implementing this strategy to great effect and making some good money out of that. It's quite complex to explain. But basically, I've got 4 people in there, and they all claim the 1-bedroom rate. So it's how you actually do that and control that. So once I worked out, okay, how I can increase my rents, I just thought, well, I don't even need to own these properties, do I? And obviously, if you remember when I was first implementing this system, the credit crunch was there, and it's difficult to get finance. So I thought, I've heard of these things called lease options. Let's do lease options. So I approached lots of people and said, you know, do you want to lease me your property, and I will then perhaps you might think of selling it, you know, in the future. Well, I know I've talked about capital growth, but most people who own a property are thinking about capital growth and do want some capital growth. So they would say, no, I don't want to sell my property, so therefore I wouldn't take on the property at all. However, I realized that I didn't necessarily need the option bit. I was interested in the income, and I could make a lot of money out of that property anyway. So I thought I'd just lease it anyway, and I called this lease to let. That's why I call it lease to let rather than the rent to rent that's banded around, because I tried to do lease options, didn't do the option bit, so I just took leases, long-term leases. So by doing that, I'm essentially guaranteeing another landlord their rent for a longer period of time and then renting it out for greater rent. So in effect, I become the tenant to the landlord. I then onwardly let it, and I do professional HMOs. So I do a lot of LHA tenants, but I've also got professional people, and I've got HMOs, professional HMOs, as well as LHA HMOs. So I do all aspects. I just take a property and work out how do I make the most cash flow out of it. Then I rented off them from a 3 to 5 year term. So I've been through the whole process. I've had to give the odd property back. What I found is that the properties that I took on in my early days of doing this, they're all renewing because they love the service, because it's such hassle-free, and they love it. So I'm just going to take you through some of how much money I'm making out of these properties. So this guaranteed rent, 625. It's just a typical standard property in Portsmouth, and I achieve the rent of £100. I don't have any other costs, no council tax, no nothing. So you know, the rent on that property might be £675, £700, and I'm making £375 a month out of that property. I don't have any maintenance costs, remember, because that's the landlord's duty, that's not my duty. So when it's full, I'm making £375 out of a property I don't even own. And we go on, we just look at different examples. A typical, a slightly larger 3-bedder, having to pay a little bit more, but I'm achieving more in rent. I do have some costs there, but I'm making over £500 a month out of that property. Again, a property I don't even own. Obviously, I'm taking some good examples here, but rarely do I actually have any of these properties. I won't take on something unless I'm making at least 300, just 350 these days that I want to make at least. So this one here, again, another one. This was a tricky landlord. He really negotiated hard. We first came across him, and he was advertising his property to let. We phoned him up, said, you know, we could come around and have a look at it. He said, oh, I've just let it out to some LHA tenants, and you know, it's fully let now. 6 months later, we saw it advertised again. Phoned him up and said, well, how about using us this time? And he said, you know, when can we take it on? When does the tenant move out? And he said, well, actually, the tenant hasn't moved out. They're not paying us. They're in arrears. So I just want to get a new tenant in. I said, well, have you actually tried to evict him yet? He said, what's all this eviction? Don't I just ask him to leave and he chuck him out and he leaves? I said, no, you have to go through the process. So we helped get rid of the tenant, take him through all the official process. So he was happy. Then he gave us the property to let, and we guaranteed actually the market rent 725. We wanted to offer him 700, but he was having none of it. And we thought, well, after all this work, surely 700 he would accept that. But he said no. And later on we discovered why, because his mortgage was 700 and his building insurance is 25 quid, so he's breaking even at that point alone, and that's it. So if he ever knew what I let it out for, I think he might be a little bit cross, because I achieved 1,500 for that, and I don't have any of the costs that he does. I have 100 quid, so I'm making 675 a month out of that property, and you can do the same. And in fact, other students who've been on my courses have done the same, so it does work all over the place. So these 3 properties alone, I make 19,000. Add on top of that 22,000 out of that one property in Guildford. And if you think about some of the other examples I showed you, that's well into 50,000 out of a handful of properties alone a year. Now, what I've done is I've developed a model that I think people should adhere to and look at, because when I first started out, I kind of did things the wrong way. I wasn't focusing on cash flow, and that is the be-all and end-all of all businesses, not just property, it's cash flow. A lot of good businesses topple over because they don't generate cash flow. They then get picked up as a song, and the next owner actually does very well out of it. So you've always got to know and understand cash flow really well. And that's why I say get yourself some financial security by securing some cash flow. And I think the easiest and quickest way in these days, you know, when I was out there, you could get mortgages very easily when I first started. These days it's harder, so you can't do lots. You might buy 1 or 2, but then you might, you know, lenders might not be happy, and you might not be able to recycle your money unless you've got loads of money. So lease to let is the quickest and easiest way to build that cash flow for you to jump out of what you're doing. And I say get financial security, which for me the definition is pay all your bills, make sure all your bills are paid for financial security. Then you want to work towards financial independence, which is, you know, kind of the nice things that you can spend stuff on. So if you want some nice cars and stuff like that, financial independence. And, you know, you can do lease options and you can source deals for people, and that to me gets you your financial independence. Obviously, I do believe that financial freedom really just comes through ownership, capital growth, and your properties go up in value, and that gives you the real wealth. And that's what everyone's after. But I just focused on that bit when I first started, and I forgot the bits below. And so I had to come back down this stairway and readjust and start again in a way. Whereas I recommend to people now starting out to focus on that first bit, get the first ladder up, and then start thinking about you know, your financial freedom. And if you're out in the property game, what happens is you start taking on lease options because you're in the lease to let game. So I started taking on lease options of some of these properties because the landlords didn't want to pay for maintenance in the end. They didn't have lots of money and they were getting fed up with their properties. So I said, I'll take it on, I'll pay for that boiler that's broken down, but I want to buy it. Yeah, fine. And I'll buy it at today's price, but I won't buy it for, you know, another 5 years in the future. That's fine. I just take it off my hands. So I've started to get lease options just automatically. And obviously, if you're out looking for property as well, you're going to start sourcing deals, and that's another way to make money out of the whole thing. So how do you make more than 50K? I've just shown out of a handful of properties you can do it. But through lease to let, let's have a look at this. I said I don't take on a property unless I make 350 a month. So let's take 350 a month. That's 12 properties, makes you over 50 grand a year. So 350 times 12 months is 50,400. It's not bad, is it, really? And look at those examples I made. A lot of those are more than 350. So if you do it wisely, actually you can make more. You know, a lot of my students to come in and actually really do really well. And I'll show you some of those. So how can I help you? I have what I call the first steps to financial freedom day. The simplest way to 50K a year. That's how I sort of say it. It's the simplest way in property to make 50K. I've got a course coming up on the 6th of July, and the link below there to book on it. And I cover all my advanced LHA strategies that you've heard about tonight in that course. And I also go through lease to let, how I find landlords and what I do. And I do it in a slightly different way to a lot of other people, I think, because I just developed this, you know, 5 years ago, and did it my way. It's worked very well. And the great thing about my strategies is I can lease to let almost any property. Whereas people who sort of do rent to rents and rent out to professionals in HMOs, they can only do it on a handful of properties. You need kind of 4-bed properties with 2 reception rooms. How many properties do you like that know like that in your investment area? There probably aren't loads. So it's a great technique that you can take it on. Now, this is from a previous example of someone who came on my course. They bought an ex-local authority house. The market rent here is 775. They now achieve out of that property through these advanced LHA strategies 1,140. And there's no cost to them, so they're making $650 a month profit out of that. So they're delighted out of that. And that's just a little ex-local authority. They discovered the power of the stud wall through my course and understood about floor plans and everything. And that's what we do on the course, is we go through floor plans, work through some of my examples. But the great thing is people bring along their own examples. And I think they brought this example along, went out and acquired it afterwards, and now they're very happy. So bring your own examples along, and we'll go through those on the day and work out how to maximize the rents. We'll put everybody's expertise and I look over them. So it's a great fun interactive workshop to work out how to increase your money. Now this is another example. Again, not a fantastic looking property there, as you can see, but they purchased this for $150,000. Need a light refurb, and again, the use of the power of the stud wall. They through the refurb, they'll be able to refinance this out, get their money back out, $175,000, and the deposit came from a joint venture investor that they're paying on an ongoing basis. So let's go through the financials of this. You know, they've now created 6 separate rooms. They could refinance their money out, but their mortgage is $642. They do pay council tax on it, $120. They also pay the loan amount to the joint venture partner of $160 a month. But they get $1,710 for the property, so that's a whopping profit of $788 a month out of that property. So again, just out of 2 properties, you can see they're almost into $1,500 a month just from 2 properties alone, and starting to get to that figure of $50K a year. So you can see how quite quickly you can get some high cash flowing properties. You're not having to invest loads into them. You're not having to put furniture into them. And you can look at properties in a different way. I had people come up to me. I bumped into some people who did my last course the other weekend, and they were saying, I'm now going out looking at properties in a different way. You know, thanks very much for this. I'm now looking at properties in a completely different way. I'm looking for different things now for doing it. This is another one who's copying my business model, my easy to let business model in Reading. This is a house where it's a typical 3-bed, 2 reception room house. You can see here. Market rent for $1,000. Basically, he took this on before other agents got there, you know, basic bog standards floor plan there. You can see 2 reception rooms, 3 bedrooms, and actually, quite quickly, he makes a profit out of £700 a month. So he's making about $1,700 out of that, and just paying a guaranteed rent of £1,000 a month. So that's their very first property that they went off and do, and they've done loads more after this, and they're already starting to hit their targets for the year this early on in the year, and that's just one property loan, £700 a month. So you might be asking, that's all great, I can now see that. How am I finding tenants? And this is something that we do on our course. We go through how to get LHA tenants knocking at your door, wanting to come and rent off you. And I call it the upside down lettings process. You know, most estate agents, what do? They say, put a good lick of paint, present it in a fantastic fashion, put it onto Rightmove, and we'll get the best rent for you. And that is probably only 20 quid a month above what another agent can get if they market it really, really well. I don't do that. I do what I call the upside down lettings process. I touched on it before. And what I do is I find the tenants and then fit them to a property and understand their different needs that they might have, as I mentioned some of them earlier on. And so it's not price that's affecting them. I understand their circumstances, what they qualify for, fit them to a property, and I can uplift my rent by doing that. They're happy because they've got a nice property. They're in the area they want to be. They might be close to a local school. They might be close to family members, or you know, I also work with people who are homeless sometimes, so they've got a property and a roof over their heads. So I'm really helping them get into nice quality accommodation, and they're really pleased, and therefore they stay with you and become great tenants if you do that. One thing I'd like to say is just be careful though, because if you don't understand the paperwork, and I have people who pick up snippets of information, think they know what they're doing, and unfortunately get their fingers burnt. And they come back to me later on and say, Mike, what you said doesn't work. I said, no, it does work. You just need to know how to do it properly. And there's a lot of information in the detail, and we go through the whole paperwork on the course. So you must understand the paperwork. You know, if you read all the documentation out there, I'm sure you can pick it up and understand it. But I did all of that, and I've learned along the way as well. I've made costly mistakes. So I know some of these mistakes, and I can save you from those, because if you get it wrong, sometimes you get less rent than you were expecting under the market conditions. And you also have to push back against the councils. I still have to do that today at times. You know, last week I won a case. I got 22 grand paid into my bank account in local housing allowance rents alone last week. So if it works, you can get it going very, very well, and that's just 1 week. So just to summarize quickly, for me, if you're looking to follow my story, escape the rat race, escape what you're doing, or even just adding value to what you've currently got, maybe you've got a large portfolio. I get portfolio landlords coming on this course, and they can increase their rents dramatically. I had one portfolio landlord come on and get really excited because he thought he could get an extra 75 grand. Another one came on and thought, well, if I applied one of the really advanced techniques, I could get over 110,000 across my portfolio a year extra. We're here just looking at getting 12 lease-to-let properties at 50k a year. You know, LHA and HMOs are a great way of making money, and I do professional HMOs on a lease-to-let scheme as well, so I won't rule that out as well, and I go through that a little bit as well on the day, but I mainly focus on LHA because I think there's so much scope to do really well out of it. So really all I say is just don't procrastinate and take some action. You know, understand these strategies, but you need to know it in detail. You know, you can go and find a lot of the detail out there, and you're welcome to do so, and you know, if you don't want to go for the course. But I really highly recommend you know, coming on the course, and what we're doing tonight with Duncan is doing a great early bird fantastic discount. It's not going to be around forever, but we normally market the course out. The recommended selling price for the course is $497. That's what we market it out for. But tonight, because we've come on the webinar and I've explained some things to you, we're offering at $297. So I think that's a really, really reasonable price. Remember, one property you take on at $350 is more than going to pay for your ticket after 1 month. Now, sometimes people work together, so they team up and want to bring someone else. By all means, bring someone else. I think you're more likely to take action, and I'm passionate about getting people to take action, and so therefore bring another delegate along for half price. When you get through to the link on the booking page, you'll see, you know, 2 delegates for $445. It's basically buy one get one half price. That's the link below for the booking price. But you know, really think about it. It's not a lot of money. You know, I'm wanting people to take action. I'm wanting people to get into it. You know, it's a day full, jam-packed full of information, facts, and figures. It's not about upselling you to the next big thing. You get enough to go away and actually implement in itself everything that you've seen that I've been doing there. And I'm not there upselling you into some other big program or anything like that. That's not what I'm about. I'm just giving you the facts, stuff that you can go away and implement into your business from day one. And that's what people have done. So that's really me now, having run through the presentation. Hopefully you've learned a lot through, think about back over the LHA tips and techniques, you know, recount, and hopefully you've taken something away today that you can implement into your portfolio or into your property business tomorrow. So I hope you've been, something was very useful. So Duncan, do we have any questions coming through on the webinar tonight?
We do indeed. We've got a load of questions. And guys, chuck your questions in because we're going to stick around till everyone has had their questions answered. And lots have been coming in, so I'll get the ball rolling. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but somebody repeated again. Can you get payment direct from the councils?
Yes, not everyone knows this, and that's why a lot of landlords get a bit scared about letting to local housing allowance tenants, because they say, well, what happens if they run off with the money? I get all of my tenants paid directly to me, so the council pays it to me. So it's almost in a way a guaranteed rent. And there's some rights within the local housing allowance, again, literature that say, you know, on certain conditions that you meet, and on the course I'll give you a letter that explains how to get it directly. But basically, it's got to be a condition of the tenancy and affordable rent.
Fantastic.
Yeah, get it direct.
Couple of please. Jeff says, "Hi Mike, how do you go about utilities and council tax, splitting them up between tenants?"
Yeah, there's lots of different scenarios that you would have seen tonight. Sometimes I do pay council tax. So when you saw those costs in there at 100 quid, then I'm paying the council tax. So occasionally I do pay the council tax, but there's certain ways of setting up contracts or arranging your property that basically transfers the liability onto the tenants, and therefore the tenants pay the council tax. And it's either in the contract or where the property is split up. The second one is utilities. Generally, I don't pay for the utilities, the tenants do, because local housing allowance doesn't include money for utilities. So they should be paying that out of their other benefits or their other income. So they are responsible for the bills, so I put their names on the bills, or quite often what I do is I convert them into key meters, so prepayment meters, and they share it around amongst themselves, so they have to pay as you go, if you see what I mean. So if they want electricity, they have to go and pay it. If you leave them to pay the bills themselves, then they never pay them. So you always must change it over into that mechanism.
Fantastic. And why? I mean, you mentioned about tired landlords, and I think obviously that's a big reason. But what's the main reason why a landlord would want to give you their property and not do it themselves?
Yeah, because there's various factors. One, they might not know about it. So what we're sharing here, for me, is like leading edge property knowledge. So most people in the marketplace just don't know about this. And in fact, a lot of the local housing allowance assessors don't know about this, and that's why you have to know where it is in the detail, where it is in the legislation, because you'll quite often have to educate them. So the landlords don't know about it, number one. But two, we offer them quite often really good guaranteed rents, and it's voids that kill landlords quite often. And the fact that the tenancy changes over and they're paying an expensive management fee. So for them, we estimate that working with us, they're probably earning an extra £1,000 a year. So over our period of time, we get on some of the contracts, they can earn, £2,000 to £5,000 a month over the period, more. So they make more money. So that is pure and simple why. And also, you can be lazy, get someone else to do it. Why not?
Absolutely. You see, you're creating win-wins.
Yeah.
James says, "Hi, I have about 40 grand in equity, and I'm really keen to get started in property and make 30 grand a year. Is this realistic, and how long do you think it will take?"
Yeah, there are many strategies. Now, if you want to do 40 grand a year, you could easily build a 30 grand a year income out of just purely lease to lets. So that doesn't require lots of capital. And you could basically also use that money as a deposit and recycle it several times. But if you buy the right properties, you can get profit out of, quite good profit out of each one. So I would recommend, you could easily do it within a year through lease to let. That's the quickest and easiest way. But as you're doing that, I'd also recommend with some of that money, buy a property, add some value to it, or buy it below market value, refinance in 6 months' time, and do it again and do it again. And you keep doing a little bit the whole time. You look back after 2 and 3 years, and you suddenly realise you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 properties, and that is actually giving you the income. And if you think of what each of those gave you £500 a month, you'd easily be making your 30 grand a year.
Yeah, fantastic. Does this work in every area?
Yes. Now, a lot of people say it's all right for you. Your council does it, mine doesn't, and it works everywhere. There are slightly different nuances in different areas because local councils adapt different things, and there are slightly different rates. So the profitability varies slightly, but the whole system is national and it works everywhere. And I've helped people implement it pretty much all over the country, and I've worked with lots and lots and lots of different councils.
Nina asks, is it better to get the tenant to get paid and then passed on to you? So if there are any clawbacks, it's not your problem.
Yeah, again, people are concerned about getting direct payment sometimes because what happens is, if a tenant changes his circumstances, wasn't supposed to have that housing benefit paid to them, and it's come to you, the council will say, I paid you that housing benefit, the tenant wasn't supposed to get it, I want it back. So the tenant might have gone and got a job and therefore wasn't entitled to the housing benefit anymore, or he might have not been living in your property anymore. But how can you be responsible for checking on a weekly basis that every single tenant of yours, and imagine how many tenants I've got, I had to check, say, on a weekly basis that any of my tenants had a job, for example. I couldn't do that. It's physically impossible. What the local authorities do is they go after you because they paid you the money, and you're likely to go, oh, yes, okay, but I'll pay it back. Get scared. They even pursue you for it and write nasty letters and claw it back. But they're not supposed to. It's the tenant's responsibility, not yours. They shouldn't be clawing it back off you. You took that money in good faith. Now, obviously, if you knew you shouldn't have been receiving the money, that's a different matter. But most people don't. So that's when it's like everyone gets annoyed. It's the clawback, it's called. It comes by surprise, and all of a sudden you're out of, potentially a couple of months' rent. That can be a lot of money, and you're going, how did that happen? That's not allowed. You can appeal, and again, I give letters on my course, the standard paperwork that you can appeal with, and I never have any clawbacks and any problem with that because I whack an appeal as soon as that comes out. And what local authorities do is that they say, right, all right, I can see that I've got to make a payment to you, so that clawback I'm just going to not pay to you. I'm going to, say they're going to pay me £1,000 and they had a clawback of 500, they'd just end up netting it off and paying me 500. So it's very easy for them to collect it, but no, I write them the appeal, and they can play hardball sometimes. So you say no, you shouldn't be doing that, and eventually they give up or they don't. But generally, these days I just write the appeal and they don't claim it back off me. So I don't get clawbacks, so there's no issue there.
Great. And then Alan asks, with the 2 and 2 LHA strategy that you were mentioning, if you had a 5th room, could you rent that out as well, privately, not to
Absolutely.
LHA?
You can rent that room out to anybody you want to, yeah. And that increases your rent even more. So yeah, it's a great way of, you can add, you don't just have to. And by the way, the rest of the house, so for example, I've got one property that I actually professionally HMO, but one of the rooms is really small upstairs, and it's below the size criteria for an HMO room. So I couldn't let out to an individual. So all I've done is right at the top floor is I put an LHA tenant in that room upstairs and given him a second room. So I get a 1-bedroom flat rate for the top floor, whereas if I was letting it just to a professional, I could only let that one room out. So there's lots of little things that you can do once you get your head around it all. Lots of little things in all sorts of scenarios that you do. So again, that just boosts the rent, and someone else wouldn't know about that and wouldn't be able to do it, and they therefore not get as much money out of that property as I was able to.
Yeah, absolutely. Ida asks, when you lease a property for a few years, what type of contract is given to you? Is it still an AST?
So I have a lease between me and the landlord, and then I issue an AST to the tenant.
Excellent. Wazi says, hi, are the 3-bed, 2 receptions, how do I get the 1-bed rate if rooms are not self-contained? Thanks.
That is through exclusive use of 2 rooms. So if you give someone exclusive use of 2 rooms, then they're entitled to the 1-bedroom rate.
Excellent.
You have to be careful with the contracts and how it's all structured, and I would advise you sort of set it up in a certain way, but that's essentially the basics of it.
A few people actually asked, where is the course being held, Mike?
Yeah, it's in a hotel near Heathrow, so it's easy to get to for everyone. Good transport links to Heathrow, so just off the M25, tube lines, train lines in. Obviously, if you're flying, you can fly down from Manchester. I've had people fly in before as well for the course. So in the Heathrow area.
Fantastic. Darius, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, Darius, do you have people from Northern Ireland who finished your course, please? Because LHA works slightly different here to the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not knowledgeable about the Northern Ireland system. I believe a lot of the principles work the same, but I couldn't give you a 100% guarantee that the 2+2 in that system works. But there'll be lots of things you pick up on, and also the whole lease to let side. You could pick up on that, but I can't guarantee you that everything that I do will translate to Northern Ireland.
Perfect. Simon Paget asks, where can you get more information about LHA tenants and LHA rules and regulations?
Yeah, I mean, it's like all these things on the internet. You know, you can find all of these things. It is government, you know, a lot of it's government legislation. Obviously, I mean, you can find out about a lot about that. But also there's you know, the practice. So there's two things here really you need to implement this stuff. That's obviously the knowledge, and you can read all the manuals or all the government legislation. It's quite a ball ache to do so, and it's not easy to you know, easy to see, obvious to find everything in it. But then you need the practical experience of implementing it, and it's that side that really can make a huge difference to you, because if you do it slightly wrong, even though it says in the legislation, because you don't quite understand the paperwork, because what it doesn't do is tell you how to fill out a housing benefit form, and we go through that on the course. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell you how you find your tenants and tell you how you know, what to say to them, what contracts to use, how to design the contract, etc. What it does do is it tells you the legislation, so you know, you can have a good conversation to the local authority with that knowledge, but you can't necessarily do this strategy with that knowledge. So, you know, obviously you can learn by trial and error, but Google is always the best place. You know, Google LHA information and all of that lot, and you can pick up a lot of the information that's banded around.
Excellent, thanks for that. Simon asks, do you advertise for LHA tenants in a particular newspaper section to attract new tenants, or how do you go about finding and?
Yeah, we use various methods to find LHA tenants, newspapers being one of them, local authorities being one of them, charities being one of them. So lots of different sources, and different areas have different nuances as well. So what works for me in one area and I train someone else, or I, you know, I operate across multiple areas, works slightly different in a different area. So it's about, and that's one thing I go through on a course. I go through each of the different areas, and it's about then mining and finding your snippet of way to find tenants in your area.
Fantastic. And that actually, I just seen another question. I think that answers it exactly. Jitendras asks, in training, do you teach how to prepare contract documents and how to find the good LHA tenants? And
yes, we do. Yeah, we talk about how to structure the ASTs. As I mentioned, we go through the actual LHA paperwork. We go through the principles of it, as well as an exact example of one of ours, so that you can get a good understanding of it, so you can apply it in your area. And obviously, we go through the whole tenant. We spend a section on tenants, tenant sourcing, and how to deal with them, and what to say to them. And because you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, I can't get tenants to live in my house. Well, if you try and advertise, come and live in 2 rooms in my house, it doesn't sound too attractive, does it? You know, you've got to understand how to market these things. So yeah, we go through all of that.
Fantastic. We've got a question here saying, how can you make a large profit in each property when the landlord still needs to be paid each month? I think we covered that in.
Yeah, because obviously the key thing is that I pay the landlord, but what I can do is obviously I get above market rents, so I kind of keep that element of it. I pay the landlord a decent rent, and obviously I actually achieve a lot higher rents than the market rents through all of the understanding and knowledge that I've attained.
Excellent. Hi Mike, from Peter. Could the councils change the rules to not allow 2 and 2 strategy to work in the future?
It's very unlikely that they're going to change that. I mean, there's a specific reason that Parliament put it in the first place, is obviously they've got a big need to house single people, and they see this route, and if you get into it, you understand why it's there. So it's very unlikely that they do it. And the tenants are entitled to, what you've got to remember is the tenants are entitled to this rate if they live in a 1-bedroom flat. So they need to live somewhere. So you're just providing housing for people who need it, and it's in there for a particular reason. There are some, you might have heard of that there are some, there's always changes going on. As I say, there's a constant life is change. I stay in touch with all of the top people within the whole, got close contacts to the head of DWP, etc., about how all of this works and what's happening in the future. And you know, I've had some things confirmed from them that what I do won't change in the near future. In fact, there are more opportunities coming my way, so I'm getting very excited about some of the changes that are coming.
Jason asks, Mike, when you work with letting agents, in brackets, if you do, how do you win them over to what you're trying to do? And do you deal directly with the owner or via the agent?
Yeah, what you need to do with the agent is obviously make sure you're not. I think you don't want to be trying to cut them out. So I'm always clear with them that I'm not trying to cut them out. I'm trying to help them out. And some agents get it and some agents don't. So just move on. If the agent doesn't get it, honestly, don't try to keep pushing it. And there's certain things you have to say. So surprisingly enough, if you phrase it in the right way, agents are actually quite familiar with this model. You just need to know and how to tap into it, and that's the key. It's the phrase. It's like all these things. I come from marketing, and that is to do with sometimes phraseology and how you present things. You know, at the end of the day, you know, what is the difference between some of the different brands out there, and it's the way that you market stuff. And again, that is the way that you do it with agents, and you do it with landlords directly, and you do it with tenants. You know, this is why I think I've probably been successful at this versus, you know, other people who've read the legislation, is because I can translate that information and put it into practice, and put it into practical application, and I understand how to attract people to me. So that's how I do it.
Great answer, thank you. Nathan asks, will landlords take you seriously for your first lease to let with no previous experience?
That is a challenge. You know, I can't, there's no bones about that. That is a challenge. You have to come across credibly. Everybody has to start somewhere. You know, we do have some things, there are some opportunities that we do run that enables people to get some credibility. But that's sort of a bit further down the line. But it is one thing that does hold people back a little bit, is this. But you know, there's an element of perseverance. There's an element of coming across confidently, and obviously, if you know your stuff because you've been educated around lettings and around LHA and around property, and you know, you then come across knowledgeable. And if you start to sort of point to landlords about things that they don't know about, then all of a sudden your authority comes across better. But it is one thing, yeah, sometimes you come across that. And even today we come across that, but obviously we've got a backing, we've got stuff behind us now that makes us look very solid.
Yeah, got the paperwork and credibility. And
yeah, and there are opportunities to get involved in that at a later date. That's so yeah, if you come on the course, there are opportunities to get involved in that.
You were mentioned earlier about ASTs. Are all the tenants on single ASTs, asked Colin, or are they as joint tenants?
Okay, I've been through lots of different types of examples today, and you know, sometimes they're on single ASTs, sometimes they're on joint ASTs. So it's by case example. So without going through the whole detail of all the structures, which is almost impossible to do without, you know, spending a vast amount of time. That's why, you know, we have a full day course. So it all links together, and that's why we have to spend a full day on it. So so we do both, basically. So the answer to the question is we do both, and it's very difficult to explain which and where and when and what without the background of understanding.
Sanjay asks, well, actually, this is a thing that you hear a lot about sort of LHA tenants. You know, people say, you know, they require lots more maintenance and stuff like that. What's your view on that? What's been your experience? Have you found that LHA let properties require much more maintenance than your?
Okay, it's like all these things. There are good LHA tenants, there's bad LHA tenants. There's good private tenants, there's bad private tenants. So it's about picking the right ones, and we talk about those that we pick. You know, there are certain sectors we won't rent to within LHA because you know, they are the ones with a bad reputation, and there's a reason why, because they can cause some damage. Now, you know, if you take that property in Guildford, remember that property, that 4-bed property that I had? These tenants were so desperate to move into that property, they couldn't wait. The tenants moved out, and I said, well, can we move in a few days early? And I said, well, I haven't tidied it up after the students. Remember, these are students. I haven't tidied it up. I said, okay, we'll do all that for you. And over the weekend, they went in, they tidied it all up. There was a fence panel that was down. They'd mended the fence panel. There was some scuffs on some wooden flooring that had happened, and they'd sanded that down and revarnished it. And so, you know, you can get some really good tenants if you know it, and they can stay for a very long time. But it's about knowing how to pick them and understanding that, and that's the key. And it's the same on private tenants, and you know, I've had private tenants wreck my house. You know, I've also learned which tenants not to through LHA through experience of my own. So I have had LHA tenants do it to me too, but now I know which ones to rent to.
Fantastic. Sukat asks, does this work in Scotland, Mike?
Yes, it does work in Scotland. Yeah.
Is it exactly the same? Because you mentioned obviously Northern Ireland.
Yeah, because Northern Ireland has a different LHA regulation. Scotland is the same LHA regulation. So there's a slightly different system in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, but the system is the same in Scotland. Obviously, you've got overlaying that some Scottish, you know, landlording law, but the LHA system is the same.
Hillary has just popped in a question, said, I'd really like to know what he does about the HMO regs that have to be in place these days, please, because you haven't gone into HMO regs.
So some properties are HMOs and need HMO regulations.
Yeah.
Most of my properties are non-licensable HMOs. They're not licensed. You know, most of my HMOs don't need to be licensed because the national license is if you have 5 or more tenants over 3 or more floors. So take that Guildford property. I said I had 4 people in it, and it's only over 2 floors. So neither criteria does it need a license. I obviously have to adhere to certain fire regulations and HMO regulations. You know, multi-let regulations on that one. So I put those in. So I do those. So sometimes some of the more advanced stuff I do. But take that property that I got 700 quid a month out of that 2-bed property. That's not an HMO. That's a single let property. Therefore, I don't have to put there's nothing different to the fabric of the property that I need to do versus a single let. And most of my stuff is single let. You know, they're not having to conform to HMO stuff. You know, I have Article 4 in Portsmouth, which is where you need planning permission to have 3 or more people in your property. So most of my stuff that I do is within the, you know, I have to obviously adhere to that within Portsmouth. So you know, if it does need it, it needs it. But I would say 75% of what I do doesn't need it.
Excellent. Sophia, do we need a lawyer for the lease contracts, or can we sort of buy the contracts already done, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, a lawyer can draw them up. You can buy them. That is, yeah. So you can buy them off a lawyer. We touch on it a bit about in the course, and sometimes we give opportunities for people to purchase ours as well. So which is then cheaper than going through a lawyer.
Perfect. Jitendra, do you still provide help after the course if I need help to like prepare documents or talk to people, or what's that?
Yeah, I mean, generally, you know, there's some goodwill after the course to help people. You know, I do have a genuine desire to help people out. So, you know, if you have some questions within the first 6 weeks, and obviously if you're not asking me a question, sort of 10 questions every day, there's a sort of fair play policy, if you see what I mean. You know, then we're more than happy to help follow up and answer questions, and we do that regularly. If you want, you know, a lot of detailed support, then I can provide coaching support as well that I do, you know, either through Skype or telephone calls. So some students do choose to do that. It's not an amazingly expensive thing to do, but obviously, you know, I only have a limited amount of time, so I have to, you know, make sure that people are going to use it. And obviously, by people paying for stuff, you know, they're making sure that they get value from it, you know, rather than just sort of firing odd random questions. So yes, we do follow up. We don't leave people hanging. We've covered a lot on the day. But if you want a formal, I'll be open. Yes, we'll answer a lot of questions. But if you want a formal support ongoing, we can provide that too. But there is a small cost to it.
Thanks. Jason asks, so if this is a basic question, and I think at the beginning, of the presentation, when you had, the map out of the UK, you mentioned this, but could you just refresh it for those who didn't completely get all of it? So if this is a basic question, but do LHA allowances vary from borough to borough, or is it consistent across the country?
Okay, so it's those broad market rental areas. So did you notice my Portsmouth broad market rental area? Within that broad market rental area, it's quite a large space, so it covered off Petersfield, Portsmouth, Gosport, Havant. So within that broad market rental area is probably 6 councils, different councils. So by operating in that broad market rental area, I deal with Gosport Council, Portsmouth Council, Havant Council, East Surrey and Hants Council. And there's some more. So there's there's a list there of number of councils within one broad market rental area. So it's the broad market rental area that you need to identify, and that's where rents are set. They're set for 1 year, and I believe if you do register for the course, we're throwing in a freebie of getting all of the 2014 rates for every broad market rental area in the country. That's so, isn't it, Duncan?
It is, and also the training videos, the 6 videos.
That's right, and also I've produced some training videos as well. And if you sign up to the course, we offer the training videos, plus you get the whole rates for every single broad market rental area in the country, and you can see it's fairly obvious. The Reading broad market rental area, the Portsmouth broad market rental area. So you get the whole list of every single broad market rental area.
Perfect. And Jing asks. But I could probably answer this one. He goes, how long is this special offer valid? Tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sending out, this also answers a couple of other questions, a couple of people asking about recording and replays. I'm going to send to all of you guys, all the attendees, the recordings, so you can go back and rewatch this at your own pace, and you can have that own copy. So I'll send that out to you. And I normally a couple of people, there's always a few people who can't actually make it live, so I'll give them a couple of days to watch the recording, and probably after that the special offer will probably be maybe a day or two, just to let the people who watch the replay the chance to get the same price, but then it'll be going down. So I think that answers a couple.
So I would say it's safe to book. You need to book by the weekend to be safe that it hasn't been taken down. I don't think we've got a specific date. But, it'll definitely be available till end of play Friday. But if you come to book on Saturday or Sunday, it might not be there because it might have been taken down. So that's why I say don't procrastinate. Take some action. Take action now for the special offer. Otherwise, it will be at the full price of $495, $497, I think it is.
Darius asks, Mike, you mentioned people on disability allowance. Did you have to invest in adjusting the property to their needs? And what kind of disability are his tenants?
No, they're not. Yes. Okay, that's a very good question. Generally, no, I don't have to modify the property anyway, shape or form. There's different levels, obviously, of disability. It's called disability living allowance because for whatever reason, generally the people can't go out and work. So it's not as though they're severely sort of physically impaired. Generally, it's other things. They might have a problem with their back. They might have, some mental reasons why they can't work. So some of those aspects is what we deal in. We do like actually letting to what we call DLA, disability tenants, disability living allowance tenants. So the difference is, rather than them having to go out and seek a job, and they're on a job seekers allowance, so they get a little bit more money than if you're on job seekers allowance.
Excellent. I think this one ties back. I might be wrong, but I think this James is the guy who asked earlier, saying he had 40 grand in equity and just wondering about the best way to be making 30 grand a year, and you gave him a couple of options. He goes, what type of house would I probably be best in buying? based on the back of your suggestions. Like, are there any in particular, like single lets, one up, one down, big properties, small properties? I mean, it's a bit of a vague question, so you can pass that one if you want. But are there any houses in particular which you think he's best to get started with?
I specialise in small houses and uplifting the rent in small houses. Obviously, depending on which part of the country you're in and investing, 40,000 can either go quite a long way, or it's not enough even to buy one house if you're in Guildford. But again, it's one of those things. I need to understand a little bit more to be able to advise really appropriately. But I do like 2 or 3 bedroom houses. Works well.
Wazim says, how do you get the 1 bedroom rate if rooms are not self-contained? Thanks.
Well, again, you can modify the property slightly to, it doesn't have to be self-contained, you just have to be, you can get the 1 bedroom rate by offering someone 2 rooms, and one of the rooms doesn't need to be that large. And we go through all of the details around what is 2 rooms and what is not 2 rooms and what is self-contained and what is not self-contained on the course, because again, we go through the particular detail of it, because in actual fact you'll be surprised what detail you need to know to understand what is self-contained and what is not. So you might be surprised what's included in self-contained. You need some specific area to store some food. So there's all this stuff that you need for self-containment, but actually sometimes it's easier than you think.
Excellent, thank you. Serena, there was a message earlier about the recording, which, yep, certainly I'll be sending that out tomorrow morning. Lynn says, what do you charge per day or per hour for mentoring?
Yes, I do. I do have what I like to do, rather than just say, okay, I charge this and I charge that, is I like to see what someone needs, and I do mentoring by the day. So for earlier on this week, I spent 2 days in Nottingham with someone, helping them get started and find a property for investment purposes, and we looked at vast numbers of properties. So it really depends what your objectives are. I can spend time working on your objectives. So I do a number of packages. So it's not always just about the hour of call. So I do, as I mentioned earlier, coaching calls. So we can set up regular coaching calls. That's one price. And if you buy a series of them, then obviously you get them cheaper. If you buy a combination of mentorships and coaching calls to work together. So I have this thing called a quarterly package. And actually, I can't remember what I actually advertise that, but I have all of those details, I think, on my website. But the quarterly package is quite good because it includes the course, includes then a day's mentorship, and also 12 phone calls over the quarter, so that you get regular contact direct with me. It's not with someone else; it's with me, and we schedule those in and have half an hour call to keep you on track. That does several things: answer any queries, keep you accountable, and keep you motivated, really.
Fantastic.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, fantastically, thank you. Sophia asks, if we bought the the lease contracts, would we still need a lawyer to legalise the contracts, or are they pretty airtight?
I mean, obviously we're comfortable with our. I mean, this is why I don't really bandy around our contracts a lot, because you get into all of this legal area. So we're comfortable with our contract. We've got a lawyer to draw it up, so we're comfortable with it. And all we do is then change. It's not like a lease option. We just change where sometimes every different contract has to be different. We use the same contract for every. So if you get one drawn up, you can then use that over and over and over again, because it's just a contract like an AST. It's you use the same AST for every property of yours, so you can do the same thing. So you can either copycat buy ours to copycat that, or go to a lawyer and do it. Go and have a look. But every lawyer has their own opinion and their own view, so you just get, you have to take your own view sometimes on contracts.
Darius, and actually there's a couple of people asking this. Really keen, they want to sign up, but they know they can't make that date. If they book, will we be able to honour that for then a future date? So if they jump in and book now, will they be able to get in next time round?
Yes. Well, all I say is book up now, and you can reserve that price, and we'll honour that for future dates. And we do have some future dates booked up, so I'll liaise with Duncan on getting those sorted out. But as long as you book in, and I don't know where in the booking system if it's way or just you'll probably get some email confirmation, but then just come back to us and say can't make that date, please give us your next available date, and we'll send that out to you. So yes, we will. As long as you book it up over the next couple of days, we'll honour this price moving forward for the next course.
Because I think you mentioned what's the price normally? It's $497. Did you say?
Yeah, $497.
That's it. I think that'd be a good point to wrap this call up. So a massive thank you to Mike for taking the time out to join this call and just answering all these amazing questions and giving us his time. So thank you, Mike. And most importantly, obviously, thank you to all of you. There's hundreds of people on the call, and for giving up your evening, because I know it's a sunny day outside. It's a rare UK sunny day, but thank you for engaging and being asking such fantastic questions. So we'll be back very shortly, and one final thank you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.